Today, more loans written outside serviceability. Hello again, I'm Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Welcome to our latest post covering finance and property news with a distinctively Australian flavour. APRA released their latest quarterly data to September 2018 covering bank property exposures. So we look at the data and discuss the implications. And by the way, if you value the content we produce, please do consider joining our Patreon program. Here is the link. Or make a donation via PayPal. Again, here is the link, so you can support our ability to continue to make great content. APRA released their quarterly property exposure statistics to September 2018, alongside the quarterly performance statistics, which we'll discuss in a separate post. Now, it's worth pausing to say that this is aggregated data, so we cannot get a feel for individual banks, though a cross-sector view does provide some context. And it's also worth saying that they warn us not to use this data to assess the state of the market, which sort of begs the question, why publish the data at all then? It's more opaque behaviour from the regulator. We'll start with the loan stock data. Total loans were around $1.6 trillion. And as we know, the growth in investor loans has slowed, and the trend lines also reflect some reclassification of loans which went on in recent times. But overall, mortgage stock continues to grow even if the rate of growth, the credit impulse, is slowing. As a result, the share of loans for property investment relative to all loans is falling now. However, the major banks still retain their top spot with around 35% of their portfolios in investor lending. And we see a more significant fall in foreign banks and mutuals relative to the major banks. And regional banks are in the middle ground. Looking at interest-only loan stock, we see a consistent fall, with the major banks still close to 20%, down from around 30% in 2015, and mutuals holding less than 10% of interest-only loans by stock. But perhaps the more interesting analysis is to be found in the flow of new loans data. For example, the flow of new interest-only loans. We see the proportion of new loans sitting at around 10%, though a small rise is seen from the mutual sector. Major banks are writing the largest proportion, but way down from the more than 40% in 2015 to around 16% now. So you can say that APRA has succeeded in taming the interest-only beast, even if it was 5 years too late. Now we turn to investment loans, which are down a bit from the pre-APRA interventions post-June 2015. But the major banks are still writing around 30% of loans as investment loans. So let's be clear, people are still borrowing. Also, you can see a rise in investment loans from other banks. The killer slide, however, is that loans written outside serviceability guidelines continues to rise at around 6% of loans written by the major banks via overrides. That's where the bank reviews standard criteria and breaks their own rules. Now, back in 2017, it went as low as 1%. Now, of course, we know that lending criteria has been tightened, but I find this high rate of overrides concerning. This means that we are still seeing risk building in the system despite the falls in home prices. We also see that mortgage brokers are still originating a considerable proportion of the book. Overall, about half of all new loans by value are from third-party channels, though with foreign banks at the top of the pack with more than 70% via brokers and mutuals below 40%. Finally, we can look at the loan-to-value, the LVR mix, highly relevant given falling prices, as we've discussed in a recent post. The share of 90% plus LVR loans is sitting below 10%, though we note a peak from the mutual sector as they chase business. Loans approved between 80 and 90% LVR are on the rise, with foreign banks leading the way and major banks and mutuals also participating. Now, this partly reflects falling property values, meaning the initial LVR tends to be higher. Not a good sign, given the prospect of further falls ahead. Many of these borrowers will have lender's mortgage insurance, which protects the bank in the case of default, but of course not the borrower. The 60 to 80% band remains pretty static, and there is a small rise in the sub 60% loan-to-value loans. This will reflect some loans being refinanced. So to conclude, while APRA's measures are having an effect, there are still signs of risky behaviour from lenders who are desperate to write business because mortgage lending is a critical profit driver for them. However, the tighter underwriting standards are still allowing more loans to be written at higher loan-to-value ratios and outside standard serviceability. These warning flags should be heeded. And it's worth observing that there is nothing reported at all on loan-to-income ratios, probably the most critical dimension to monitor in a high-risk environment. And this is a shameful gap in the data, and it should be addressed. As always, if you like what you've seen here today, please share and like the post and add a comment or question. I read them all. And if you want to join the growing band of subscribers who receive alerts when we release new posts, do subscribe now by hitting the subscribe bell. And if you have already subscribed, many thanks. I really appreciate your support and participation. I'm Martin North, the Principal Analyst at Digital Finance Analytics. Many thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.